Welcome to the Anxiety at Work podcast. I'm Chester Elton, and this is my co-author and dear friend, Adrian Gostick.
Hi, everybody. We hope that the time you're going to spend with us is going to help remove the stigma of anxiety and mental health in the workplace and in your personal life. We invite experts from the world of work and life to give you ideas and, most importantly, the tools to deal with anxiety in your world.
Our guest today is Andrew Seaman. Andrew is a senior editor for job search and careers at LinkedIn. A graduate of the Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism, Andrew has a rich history as a writer and editor with USA Today and then Thomson Reuters before joining LinkedIn. Andrew works with a focus on bringing people together with the information they need to be successful in their careers and their everyday lives. He works at our favorite platform for social media, LinkedIn. Welcome to the show, Andrew. We're delighted to have you on our podcast.
Thank you. I'm delighted to be here.
Well, Andrew, again, thanks for taking a few minutes with us. What a rich background you have to be able to help those who listen to our podcast. And you know as well as we do, there's one big workplace stressor right now, and even during the best of times, is job searching. For those looking for work, and also if you're a manager trying to find the right people. Well, right now we've got more than 12 million people in the U.S. unemployed, and many more are seeking new or better employment. So overall, if you could just talk to us a little bit about how you think threats to job security and finding jobs might be affecting anxiety levels right now.
Definitely. I think there is a lot of anxiety around the idea of job searching. And I think it goes two ways. There are people who are obviously unemployed, like you said, but there are also people who they want to just look for something new anyway, because there's always those people who say, you know, I don't really like where I'm working right now, or I don't want to be on this team anymore, or I want to do something different. And in addition to having the people who are unemployed looking, you have those people who are saying, you know, where am I going to go if things are this bad? So there's a lot of different components to this. And you have those people who are worrying, first of all, about all the uncertainty that's out there, because obviously the pandemic is still around. We have places where it pops up. We have areas of the world where there are different variants that are, frankly scary. And then there is the idea of transitions, because right now, there is vaccines that are rolling out, and some places have more than others. There are states that are opening up, so everything is in this really weird flux period. So you have people who say, okay, well, if I get a job working from home, is it going to go back to the office relatively soon? So there's just so many variables right now, and all of it leads, like you said, to that uncertainty, and that really drives the anxiety. And, we see that in job seekers, we see that in just people overall, and we see that in businesses. And that's really what the initial wave of layoffs were about, was companies that saw uncertainty and said, we need to really start cracking down on our budget if we're going to weather this. So uncertainty really drives that, just from a company standpoint, from a people standpoint. It's just such a huge driver of anxiety.
Yeah, it's interesting. In our book, Anxiety at Work, uncertainty and the lack of communication, I say, hey, what does the future hold? Well, nobody knows, right? And that really does drive anxiety. The other thing you mentioned that I think is really important is, if you're unhappy in your job right now, that the thought of transition, as you mentioned, has got to be a huge driver of anxiety. Are you seeing that in a lot of job seekers, staying in a job where they're not happy because they're afraid of making the transition?
Yes, we actually just did a workforce confidence index, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but we did have quite a few people who said that they were basically sheltering in their jobs. So it wasn't necessarily that they wanted to be there, but they said, hey, this is better than nothing, and I'm going to stick it out until things improve. So there are a lot of people out there who are basically saying, regardless of what's happening, I'm going to stay where I am, and I'm going to wait this out. And I think, most people, they know that there are changes coming, and hopefully they're for the better. But until then, they're going to sort of stay in their current roles.
Yeah. One thing, Andrew, too, is that we do a lot of executive coaching, and we've got some leaders that we're leading or coaching who say, I've got employees that normally I might get rid of, but I'm not. And so are you seeing a little of that too, that maybe your people are hanging on to employees they might normally not have there as long.
I don't have any data on that, but I could definitely see that happening. What a lot of people don't understand, especially in the public, is that hiring is a very costly process for a company. So if you are, thinking about your budget and you have to invest a lot of that in recruiting or anything like that, you may err on the side of, hey, I have these people who maybe they're not doing priority work right now, but I'm going to keep them because I can either pivot them or restructure them internally instead of going out and doing this whole process. So that's why even job seekers, I always tell them, despite what they believe, companies want to hire people quickly because the quicker they hire them, the better it is for their bottom line. So, companies that are maybe facing a cash crunch or they don't want to go through the trouble of, combing through thousands and thousands of resumes, I think they might hold on to some people.
Yeah. It's interesting. We talk about getting back to a routine. You've got this uncertainty, right? Getting to a routine. We always recommend don't do the death scroll through your news feed in the morning. It's not going to cheer you up, particularly if you are a job seeker, right? We say, look, get your sleep, exercise, have some routines. What are some of the things that you recommend that people do to stay in a healthy mindset? Have you got a couple of tips for job seekers to stay in a good frame of mind while they're seeking for a job?
Definitely. And I think, you said the best word of all, routine. And I know that, people do like variety in their life, but there are some things that you just want to have a rhythm about. You want to be able to say, hey, I have control over this aspect of my day, because job seeking is really about uncertainty. You are going to be putting a lot of effort into the job search, and you may not get some or most of that back on most days. So you really want to have something where you could sort of wake up and you could have that routine. And I think one of the issues with the pandemic is that it really disrupted everyone's routine. I don't have my morning commute anymore. And when it got really cold, my commute forced me out of my apartment, basically. So I have to remind myself, even if it's really cold outside, go outside. But I think routine is probably one of the best things people can do. And then I think the other thing is, if you're a job seeker, don't focus on your job search 24/7. I think a lot of people go into their job search and say, hey, my job search is now my 24/7 job. And that really shouldn't be the case. I just saw someone who was basically saying, hey, I need a job now, not months from now. And while I think it's very difficult for a lot of people to view it this way, it's if you focus on the process and you focus on sort of doing the right things and not letting it take up all your time, I think you will find that you will land a job faster than if you're just panicking and trying to rush through a job search. So that's another thing, is don't let the job search consume your life, and find hobbies. And, I think there's a lot of different ways to do this. I just wrote a newsletter on finding hobbies, and I think that's really important because I think too many of us, and I've done this before, they let their profession become their identity. And even if you are not losing your job. I remember when I was transitioning from Reuters to LinkedIn, I had these really strange feelings of like, something's missing. I'm at this new place, I have a great team, but there's still something lacking. And it's really because I tied too much my identity to my work. So I think it's really important for people to go out there and try new hobbies. Try to find something that will fill your day other than your job search. Maybe it's spending a certain amount of time every day with your children or your family, but that's really important to do, so that way your identity isn't too tied to your job. That'll set you up for success in the future, and it'll keep you sane during your job search, I think.
Sanity, we're all looking for that. You kind of answered my next question. I was going to say, we always talk about things you should do, like a routine and have that consistency. What should you stop doing? And what I heard you say was, don't let your job become your identity. Don't make it 24/7. And don't let your job be your identity, which is kind of interesting. Is there a third one a tip out there, something you should stop doing?
Yeah, I think, one thing that I should emphasize too is the stop doing, and I sort of alluded to this before, is focus on the quality of your job search and not the quantity. A lot of people do what is traditionally known as the spray and pray method, where you basically send out 100 and hundreds of applications and you just hope one will land in the right inbox. But really, focus on a strategic way to job search and, find what works for you. Everyone's job search is going to be a little bit different, but figure out your own path, what you think is working. If you're not getting calls back, if you're not getting responses, switch it up. So focus on your quality. And then as for what not to do, I think one of the main things is to don't take things personally. That's probably the best thing going into this, because job searching can be very lonely. And I think it's always great to seek out other job seekers. And unfortunately, one of the things about job seeking is that you don't tell people about it. And I always tell people who are looking for work, did you tell your friends? Did you tell your family? And one person, when I was texting them, they were looking for a new job, and they said, what could I do? I said, did you tell your friends or family? They responded, are you crazy? And I said, no. I said, how are they going to help you if they don't know you need help? Create a support system, but even when you don't have that, just don't take things personally, because you're going to get a lot of rejections, either outright or implied. So you're either going to get rejection letters and say, hey, thank you for applying. Unfortunately, we're going in a different direction. Or you're just not going to hear back. And that is what I call the implied rejection. Don't take, silence after a week or so as rejection. Make sure you're following up. But, after 3 weeks or a few months, you might feel that rejection. Realize that it's not you, that there's not a group of people out there saying, hey, we're not going to hire Bob or Janet. It's just part of the process. And there is a job. There are jobs for you out there. It just takes some time to find the right one for you. So try not to take those rejections personally. Try not to take unanswered messages personally. And that's easier said than done. I think sometimes I say it that it should be easy for people to do, but even as a journalist, and I covered medical issues and some controversial topics over the years, I think it did take me a while to sort of disassociate myself with some of the messages that I got, but you can do it after a while. So just sort of get yourself in a good space, and I think that's where having the support system, having those hobbies can really protect you from that.
That's such great advice. We talk about reframing, and in your mind, instead of, oh, I'm a loser, I didn't get callback. It's no, it's, as you say, I love what you just said. It's a process that they're going through, and you're part of that process. And yeah, there is the right job out there for you, and that's what you want to seek. So I love that. So one of the things in our book, Anxiety at Work, we talk to a lot of sort of 20-somethings. And what was really fascinating for us as older guys was to hear how often younger people talk about anxiety and mental stress and mental health. And yet it's really not something we talk about a lot at work. We were talking with our book agent a couple of weeks ago, and he was saying we were hiring an admin in our office, and we had an amazing young woman come in. She was great. We were doing the interview, and he says at the end, is there anything else I should know? And she says, I need to tell you that I do have anxiety. And he says, wow, we just are publishing a book with Adrian and Chester on anxiety. So we think that's just fine. And she's turned out to be an amazing employee. But my question, I guess, for you is, now, when in the world would you recommend a job seeker talk about mental health? Is there ever a time? Should they do it early? Should they not? What are your thoughts there?
I think that it is something that is worthy to ask about. It's always interesting, and it depends on the industry, sadly, because I know that I've overheard conversations with friends who are in other industries that are more, I'm not going to say militaristic, but sort of Spartan, where the individual does not really matter. It's sort of the mission overall. And in some respects, it's great to have that mentality, but you can't let the individuals fall through the cracks because they're the ones who are going to carry you over the finish line. So really, I think what people need to do is they need to ask about the benefits that the company offers during the process. So if something's important to you, so if you have a pre-existing medical condition, if you have a mental health need, I think that's something that's important to ask about, to say, hey, what are your benefits? Do you include mental health in that? And ask for specifics, because I think a lot of people, especially when you're dealing with a hiring manager, a recruiter should know this stuff. They might just gloss over of course we have, benefits and blah, blah, blah. But, you might find that, mental health isn't exactly covered, or there's some weird policy about that. So you're going to want to check into that. I think that's how you bring it up a little bit. And you can bring that up, I think, when you're in the hiring process and you're talking about, really onboarding. So, once it's looking like a guarantee and you have a really good feel about the company's culture and you have a really good feel about the benefits it offers, I think that's when you could bring it up. Like, I think, in some industries it's more standard to do that. Like, I work for a really great company and they have fantastic mental health benefits, and I take advantage of them. And then I think freely talking about it when you're in the role, and also when you're doing the interview process, just say, hey, what is the support system like? Is there burnout? And it's especially important now because my living room is my office now. So,
right.
Sometimes you need to have that break. And even last week, I took Friday off, even though I usually am really busy on a Friday. I, just said, hey, I need to take this day off. I did a lot the week before, and I just need to have an extra day to myself. And, that's wasn't a problem for me. So I think it's a continued conversation. You could start it during the interview by asking about the benefits. Before you're onboarding, you could say, hey, what is it like if, I'm overwhelmed one day, or maybe I have too much work on my plate. And then, when you're in the job, you could talk about it. Because like I always tell my coworkers, hey, we have these great benefits, please use them. So I am sort of like a walking, talking spokesman internally for our company's benefits. And so I think that's always a great thing to look into.
I love what you're saying there about, you're an ally, right? You can, new people coming in and say, by the way, I take advantage of these benefits. In my era, if you had a therapist or a counselor, it was like a super red flag. You and I live in the New York area. I don't think I know anybody that doesn't have a therapist, right? It's become much more the norm if you live in New York City. But, we talked about routines, about tamping down anxiety and whatnot. What tips do you have for job seekers to kind of keep that anxiety at bay as far as preparing for an interview? Prep for the interview, especially now that it's online, and you've got to do the video impression. I've got some young people in my life, and they go, yeah, having to record the interview, you don't know who you're talking to, yet there's no feedback, and you put it out. And even when you do have some feedback, it just is different than live. So what tips do you have as far as interview prep? Any insights there that could be helpful?
Yes, I think, the key word there is prep. Preparation is the mantra for interviews, because even though, anything can happen during an interview, you can be asked any question, it really comes down to doing your research ahead of time, getting comfortable with the process. So I think the basic preparation right now is to ask the recruiter, ask the hiring manager, hey, what are you going to be using for the interview? Are you going to be using Zoom? Are you using an internal system? Because a lot of bigger companies, they actually have their own internal, video systems that aren't Zoom. So ask them, is there a way for me to sort of just test out the technology ahead of time? And then, put some thought into where you're going to be doing the interview. Is there a clean room in your house that you could do it in? I use a big camera that I could change the focus so everything always looks clean and tidy, even though it's not. And then, just keep practicing, and then maybe even ask a friend or a relative and say, hey, can you log into your Zoom and, have a conversation with me? And one of the things I always tell people is to make sure you're looking at the camera. I used to have googly eyes next to my camera to remind me to look there and not at the screen. Yeah. And I think that's probably one of the key things. And you make a really You make a much better connection when you're looking at the camera because the camera is technically their eyes. So that's really important now. And then in terms of the actual interview itself, I think you have to look into maybe who's interviewing you. And the recruiter should be able to tell you who is going to be doing the interview. Maybe there's going to be a few people. Take a look at their LinkedIn profiles. Maybe Google them. Have they been on a podcast before? You can listen to the podcast. You can listen to what their interests are. And then you can sort of research them in addition to the company. And then, like I said, that would be probably your next step is look at the culture of the company, look at what the company does. Can you find out about their business? Is there a structure to their business? Because I think, at least the companies I've been a part of, they have sort of this elevator pitch of how they make money. And I think if you walk in there with an idea of how that works, because every company is a little bit different, even if you have an understanding generally of what that is, I think they'll be impressed with once you know the fundamental business process that they're using. And then, go into the position specific things. So, make sure you are prepared for the basic questions, make sure you're prepared for advanced questions. Are there any hard skills like specific software that is common in that position? And then finally, always go with a list of about 3 questions that are more than just sort of the general guidance of job seeking. So ask them specifics about the company. Maybe ask about their benefits. Is there something that you didn't want to know or that you do want to know? And I think usually one way to come up with those questions is during your research. If there's something you can't find and you're genuinely curious, you could say, hey, listen, I was looking, through your company's website. I was looking at your LinkedIn page. I was looking at some of your SEC reports, but I can't find this answer. And that's a nice way to let them know, hey, I'm doing my research, I'm serious about this, and then that you also have this question, which is important. And then I think the most important thing I always remind people is tell them you want the job. I think a lot of job seekers, they go through the process and they'll sort of be lackluster in the whole process, like, oh, okay, here, I'm doing the interview. And what I always tell my friends is whatever you do, tell them you want the job. And it's always sort of this pause moment that they look at me like I'm crazy. And I'm like, tell them you want the job. Because I said so many people don't. And I said that makes such an impact when you say, I really want this job. I genuinely think I could help you with your problem. And I think that's also just the last thing is just to make it about them. Companies and employers are selfish entities, and it's about them and what you can do to solve their problems.
That's awesome, Andrew. Thank you. That's what terrific, advice going in with questions. And, we've hired a lot of people in our careers, and you're exactly right. So many people come in and any questions for it? Man, nothing. It's like that lack of curiosity is, I'm not asking, your CEO was recently indicted. Did he get convicted? Probably not a good question. Just warn you right now. Yeah. So let's shift for a minute to the hiring manager themselves, because a lot of the people who listen to our podcast are managers. We talk a lot about culture in our work, that, culture attracts the right people, repels the wrong. So when you have been writing, a lot for managers, how can we talk about culture in the hiring process in really a positive way? Have you seen some examples of that you could share?
As for examples, I think it comes down to the actual conversation that people have. And what I do like is that there are a lot of CEOs out there who are being more genuine in their communications. And I think we've seen that shift probably over the last 3 to 4 years. I think as people became more politically aware and socially active, they want to know where a company's leadership lies on a lot of issues. And I think a lot of the larger companies have taken note of that. So one of the things that I've noticed in my LinkedIn feed is that a lot of the CEOs that I follow, they are actively putting their opinions and thoughts out there into the world. And I don't think we've seen that in a long time. And also what their actions are, because I think companies are realizing they can no longer just sort of put words out there and say, oh, we're working on diversity, we're working on this, we're working on that. People are actually saying, we want to see what you're doing. So that is probably going to be one of the biggest things that any company, any manager can do is actually show action in what you're doing. So during an interview, during communications, don't just say, we're committed to diversity. Give examples of what your company is actually doing. So don't just tell a job seeker that, we're really committed to helping underserved youth or something like that. Say that you've donated X amount of laptops, or say that you have a coaching program where you go out to local school districts and actually teach people how to do skills to get jobs, or maybe, people aren't going into college and they want to just go into a trade, which is really important, and we need those people. So, give them examples of what your company is actually doing. And then internally, I think let them talk to people in the company. I think one of the best things that people can do is have hiring committees. So before you bring someone on, don't have this sort of hiring committee to see if the person is a quote unquote cultural fit, because I think that also is really exclusionary, because if you do that, you're only going to get a bunch of people who look and act like the people you already hired. I think what you need to do is actually have them, for the benefit of the job seeker, to say, what's your day-to-day really like? What are you doing that that bothers you? What is there that you think can be improved upon? What's your favorite thing about working for this company? So it's almost that the job seeker is interviewing those people. I think that is something that's really great and can also ease their transition into the company, especially now that we're all remote, or a lot of people are remote. So I think it's about action and just open communication. And I think no company is perfect on any issue. So I don't think there's any perfect company on any issue. So being honest about the challenges, what you're working on, what actions you took, and I think that'll go a lot toward translating the culture.
I really like what you said there at the end. No company is perfect. My dad used to say, look, if you're looking for the perfect company, they're going to be looking for the perfect employee, and you're going to be out of luck.
Exactly.
So let's talk a little bit about career development. Sometimes you get into a job, or you're looking at a company and you really want the job, and then you get in there and you find that there's really no upward mobility or any development. Well, when is it appropriate to talk about those kinds of things? How are you going to invest? What is the career path forward? Because often we'll talk to young job seekers and young people in jobs, said, hey, I love the company. There's just nowhere to go. What's the advice on how to figure that out before you take the job?
You have to ask. You have to sort of say, hey, in 3 years, where do you see the person in this position? And I think it'll tell you a lot about the company when you hear their answer, because there are going to be some companies where they stammer and they say, we expect the person to be in that position because, we have that need, and we assume we'll have that need then. But the best companies, I think, invest in their workers, and they want to see them grow. And because, I think Amazon has that program where you become sort of culture champions, and that's how they find their next best talent, things like that. So, I think companies that invest in their people and see them rise get to have this invaluable commodity in their company that you don't get other places. And it's almost like a conveyor belt of talent, because you get to keep introducing people to that stream. So when you ask them, hey, what is the career trajectory for someone in this position? They should have some idea of saying, like, hey, you could go here, you could go there. And then much larger companies will give you ladders to say, okay, you're going to be an IC2, an IC3, or, independent contributor or manager. And I think you have to be clear about what you want to, and have some idea where you want to go and express that. So maybe you want to be a manager, maybe you don't want to be a manager. And, you could ask them, how do I get to where I'm going? And then even during the interview process, there's been some suggestions that I've heard from experts that have been really interesting about sort of negotiating a promotion before you accept a job. I think you should be skilled in doing that before you try it, because I think that could go pretty wrong pretty quickly. But there's the idea of saying, hey, I am happy to do this job, but let's say I meet all of the metrics that you want me to meet, and a year later, can I get bumped up to this position, or can I start doing this, or I think that I would love to have some side projects, or I would like to help with something else on the side. What is the opportunity, and can you assure me that I could do that if I meet these objectives? So, you have to ask them, but you also have to know what you want, and there's a lot of conversation that has to happen between there. But hopefully on both sides there's knowledge about what that trajectory will look like.
And I think that comes back to your research on the company. If you research says, hey, we like aggressive people, more than appropriate to say, hey, I want to build a career with you. How does that work? And I loved your comment about, look up the boss's profile on LinkedIn. I'll tell you, just the other day, I was looking up somebody and they didn't have a profile on LinkedIn. I thought, what are you, nuts? You don't have a profile on LinkedIn.
Maybe
What's
they're
the
on witness
matter with
protection. You don't know.
Yeah, what are you hiding? The last question I have for you is, are you finding that people are looking for sort of pandemic-proof jobs? It's really interesting. People say, oh, if you're a nurse, you're always going to have a job. Accountants always have jobs. Lawyers, whether you're opening a company or going bankrupt, lawyers always have it. There's this perception that there are careers that are sort of bulletproof. Are you seeing more of that now because of the pandemic?
Definitely. I think this has been a wake up for a lot of people. I think people in my generation, I'm a millennial, so I think a lot of us grew up, or at least were thrust into the job market right during the last recession. So we sort of have an idea of, okay, things aren't guaranteed. With this recession, I think we've seen it hit people across the board. In fact, I was just looking at some unemployment numbers, and there's some research showing that over the pandemic, older workers who typically are protected during recessions were actually harder hit than mid-career workers. So people who are like 35 to 54, these were people who were actually hit a little less than older workers. So they still don't know why that's happening. It could be that companies changed the way that they actually did layoffs. Maybe they did it more across the board. Maybe older workers were more vulnerable because of the telework component. They're still not sure, but I think most people now, even if regardless of the generation, are waking up to the idea that, okay, nothing is really guaranteed. For myself, I am a journalist, so I always grew up in this sort of fear-based area where it's like, don't take anything for granted because the newspaper can close tomorrow. So there is a lot of fear in that. But I remember when the pandemic first hit, there were two things that really stuck out to me. And the first was that I just got tons of messages from people saying, how do I change my career? And, this is my first pandemic. I think it's the first pandemic for a lot of people. But I just thought, I'm like, this doesn't make sense to me. Why are all these people wanting to change careers? If I were, in their shoes, I would say, I want to keep looking for the job I have. That's my skill set. And then the other thing was that I just got a bunch of messages saying, I want to work from home, or I want a job that is fully remote. So I think what happened was, as I thought about it more, is the career change thing was actually completely natural. And it makes complete sense because people did want to find those pandemic-proof jobs. They wanted to say, hey, I want to go into this area because I think it's going to be more sustainable for me. Or, then there is obviously the group that says, I had to question all my life decisions and I don't want to do this anymore. So there were a bunch of different components there. But then obviously the people who say, I want a work from home job, I think did see that security there. And I think there's still a lot of people who are going after those work from home positions. There are still a lot of people who are looking for recession-proof jobs. And I think there are two components when you're planning that. The first is there are some industries that are just built better to weather downturns. Healthcare is probably the best and most readily available example of that. And actually, I think there was a story about 2 or 3 years ago where Las Vegas was trying to rapidly beef up their healthcare sector because they were, just sort of pummeled during the last recession because they are a luxury destination. So if they built up healthcare, they would be able to withstand the pandemic, but we saw that actually wasn't the case. Either maybe they didn't fully, beef up their healthcare sector, but healthcare is not immune to that. And I think we saw that in this case because we had a lot of healthcare support staff that were let go, but then that bounced back pretty quickly. But so you have the component of, okay, is the industry relatively needed, even if there is a downturn? And then the second thing is the ability of a company to change. So, I'm in meetings periodically with other other organizations, and I remember asking, what is the plan for the next recession? And I think the most prepared companies will know that high times don't last forever, and they're going to have to pivot eventually. So, I'm on the board, the alumni board of Columbia Journalism School, and, during the last recession, they increased enrollment because so many people wanted to go there. So I remember asking, what is the plan for the next recession? Because, I was during the last one, and are we going to increase the class size again? And the best organizations, the best companies, they will have a plan for when things go wrong. So I think it's okay to ask that. And even if you're a current employee somewhere, say, hey, if things go bad again, what's the plan? And I think you should have managers and people like that who can say, hey, we thought about this, we had a meeting, we did some experiments, and we think that we're going to be okay, and this would be the game plan if something did happen. So you're never going to find a perfectly safe job, but you could do some things to at least do your due diligence. And I think the most important thing is just always be job searching in terms of, make sure you're keeping your network going, making sure that you're keeping, track of your accomplishments, your achievements. If you get really good recommendation letters from your manager about projects, print those off and put them in a file. So just be prepared in case things do go belly up.
Andrew, you write a wonderful column on LinkedIn. Are there other ways that people could connect with you? How would you recommend people learn more?
Of course, people can follow me on LinkedIn, and every Friday I do a live show called Get Hired Live, where I bring experts in. It'd be great to have both of you on, in a little bit. And then, so you can find me on LinkedIn, and then follow me there. You'll see my posts, the newsletter, and then the LinkedIn Live. So I'm always online.
That's awesome. Well, this has been so great. Any last message for our listeners? A couple of things you might recommend to somebody right now who's feeling the stress and anxiety of job searching. If you had to sum things up for our listeners today, what would you say?
I think if you are feeling really overwhelmed, if you're feeling really anxious, it's okay to take a pause. I think that's what I try to tell myself to do. And, like I said, last week, it was one of those weeks where I just got done with a ton of work and I just needed some extra time. And I didn't have any plan for the day I took off. And I just said, even if I have to clean the apartment, scrub the bathroom, whatever, but it just gave me some extra breathing room. And even if you're in the middle of a job search and everything feels overwhelming, take that time, do some thinking, figure out what you need, and, take almost just like an internal inventory of saying, okay, these are the things that are important. These are the things that aren't. How do I get the important things done? And what do I need to feel okay about it? And I think once you have that distance, it really clears things up for you. I think, when the pandemic first hit, I was asking experts, what would be your one best piece of advice for job seekers if they're laid off, and they all said, pause, just wait a second. And I think that is always the best thing. Even if things are rushed and things are going terribly wrong, just take a deep breath before taking a step.
Listen, lots to unpack here. This is a podcast you could probably listen to 2 or 3 times if you're a job seeker. Thank you so much for being on the show, Andrew, for giving us your time. I had to laugh when Adrian said, where can we find you? The obvious answer is LinkedIn. Go to LinkedIn, and then go to LinkedIn. And then if you haven't gone to LinkedIn, go to LinkedIn. And that's where you'll find Andrew. Delighted to have you on the show. Thank you so much. Your advice is going to help a lot of people that are suffering from a lot of anxiety and don't have cats at home.
Yes,
Andrew's
I'm fighting.
holding up his cat, by the way.
Yeah, I'm fighting off my cat right now, who wants.
I've done it many times.
Yes,
That's awesome.
I think he's saying that he wants some food. But thank you both for having me.
So, Adrian, really a lot to unpack there, and a lot of great tips. What were some of your key takeaways?
You're right. So much there. Just from the really start of, if you're looking for a job, you want to bring down your anxiety levels, have a regular routine, right? And don't make this a 24/7 thing. Have some hobbies. It's interesting. You and I have worked a lot in Europe, where you ask somebody, "What do?" They go, "Well, I ride the bicycle. I read poetry." They have other things in their life, and they wouldn't even think about telling you about their job first. But here in America, we are so tied with our jobs. It's okay. Have some other parts of your life. That's okay.
Yeah. One of the things that struck me right away is he said, his friends are job seekers. Did you tell your friends and family? Oh, geez, I would never tell my friends and family. So those are the first people you should tell. Reach out to your network right away. I thought that was just a wonderful, visceral response, and something that, for a lot of people, it's not easy to do.
Yeah. And then in the interview itself, I loved very practical advice. If you do have some anxiety or you're overwhelmed now and then, you ask in very subtle ways. Perhaps instead of saying, "I have anxiety, what are you going to do for me?" you say, talk about the benefits here, or talk about, is there burnout? I mean, let's be honest about, is this a place that, where you can step back now and then if you are overwhelmed? Will you help me if I'm feeling overwhelmed? I've been in that situation before. Much better ways of dealing with your anxiety in an interview. I thought that was pretty practical.
Yeah. I liked you when he said, don't make it your full-time job. It becomes overwhelming. Take a break, take a beat. I mean, even in his job, he says there are times when I take a day off, and whether it's just to clean the apartment or just take that mental break. I think you get so consumed in trying to find a job, and then you become so anxious and so obsessed with it that you're thinking about it 24/7. Clearly not healthy.
No.
Take a break, spend some time on your hobby or whatever it might be, and come back to it with fresh eyes.
Speaking of eyes, I loved his little tip there. You're in the interview. Everybody looks down at all the characters. He says, put some googly eyes next to the camera, that little green dot up there, because you're going to come across so much more sincere and positive if you are looking into the camera. What a great little tip. As well as, bring some questions into the interview. Great little things. And I love that last one. What did he say, Chess? Ask for the job.
Yeah. I'll never forget. I was interviewing for a job. This is 100 years ago. And I asked my dad, I said, give me a tip. He said, ask for the job. I said, oh, okay. And he says, yeah, ask for the job like 10 times. And it was so funny. And I did. I was a young kid. I didn't, your dad tells you to do something, you do it. And I remember leaving the interview, and I asked the interviewer, I said, what's the one thing that you're going to remember from this interview? She said, that you really want this job. I said, and don't you forget it. Yeah.
And did you get the job?
I absolutely got the job. Yeah. No one else wanted it more than me. Well, I think this is really great information for a lot of people out there that are stressed and anxious, whether you're in a job and you're not sure if you're going to be able to keep it, whether you're actively job seeking. And the last thing that I really took away was when he said, always be job seeking. Always be networking, always be looking. So when it happens, you're not caught unawares. I thought that was a huge takeaway for me.
That was. So a big thanks to our producer, Brent Klein, to Christy Lawrence for finding amazing guests like Andrew, who help us really unpack this idea of anxiety at work. If you like the podcast, please download it. That really helps us build up a little notoriety so we can get even cooler guests. Not that we haven't had just some amazing guests. And if you'd like to learn a little bit more, Anxiety at Work is our new book from HarperCollins, or check us out on the WeThriveTogether.global community.
Yeah, it's a free network. It's a safe place to talk about, mental health, anxiety. We bring in some great guest speakers. We have workshops. We drop our podcasts in there. It really is a wonderful place. Would love to see you there. And if you're a leader that's looking for ideas on how to manage a workforce that maybe have a little more anxiety, please, great tips for leaders there too. Well, Adrian, another great podcast. I will see you again next Friday. Same bat channel, same bat time.
Thanks, everybody. Good mental health.